I'm Steve. Welcome to my studio. All right, if you've been watching my last few videos, and you know we're in the middle of a series based on the Axe-Fx 3, FM9, and FM3, where I'm showing how I was able to create one preset that works for most of my tonal needs using my ConTONEuum preset. Last week, I broke down the crunch tone part of the preset. This week, as you just heard, it's time for the lead tone. In this video, I'm going to show you how I started with the crunch tone from last week and pushed it into a lead guitar sound that sustains, cuts, and still feels musical without turning it into a completely different rig. Just like the other videos in this series, I've broken this tone out into a standalone preset so we can focus on it without distractions. And like last week, this preset will be available along with the full ConTONEuum preset on my website at theguitarnerd.com. Now we're going to walk through tabs and parameters, and I'm going to compare these settings directly to what we used for the crunch tone so you can see what actually changed. Before we dig in though, I want to make a quick note. After the last video went live, a viewer who goes by 2550 Marshall pointed out a few things related to impulse response creation. Now that sent me back into my capture chain, and I ended up reshooting all my IRs. And it turns out he was right. The new IRs have better low end response and a much wider stereo feel when I run two IRs panned hard left and right. This preset, as well as the ones from last week on my website, have already been updated, and anyone who had previously downloaded them should have automatically received the new versions. It's a preset that's designed to work consistently, and it's still growing and improving. All right, so let's do this thing. In the last video, we started by establishing our speaker sound in the cab block. Because I want this to feel like one cohesive rig, I'm using the same speaker cab choices across all the tones. Same speaker foundation, same overall approach. If you want the full explanation of why these cab choices work and how the align page can fit into all this, that's all covered in the previous video. And everything here builds upon that. And with the cab doing what it's supposed to do, the lead tone really comes down to what's happening in the amp block. Now, before we get to the amp block, I am running some reverb and some delay on this sound just to kind of fill things out, make it sound a little more live. Now, the delay is a multi-tap delay, and it's a setting I got from Todd. I don't remember exactly which setting it is, but I will leave a link to his blocks library because he has got some great sounding blocks. And the reverb is just Recording Studio C, which is a preset that comes with the Axe-Fx and FM9 and I presume FM3. Now over here in the amp block, I'm using the same amp model that we used for the crunch tone. The goal wasn't to reinvent or redo the amp. It was to take something that already works and push it into lead territory. So instead of randomly tweaking things, I'm going to show you what changed compared to the crunch tone and why those changes matter. Now here's the crunch tone from the last video. And because being a rhythm tone, it doesn't have a whole lot of drive, I can roll back on the guitar's volume to clean things up. Now, here's the lead tone. Now notice, this isn't about adding a massive amount of gain. What I wanted was more sustain, more compression, more roar, but without losing pick definition. And if you just keep piling on gain, lead tones get blurry pretty fast, especially once you're playing with other instruments. See, this is about how the gain is working, not just how much of it there is. Now, let's talk about mid-range, because this is one of the few spots where a little theory actually matters. For the most part, lead guitar lives in the mid-range. That's where notes speak, where phrasing translates, and where solos actually cut through a mix. If you'll recall last week's video on crunch tone, I did emphasize the mids in a few places. Now here, compared to the crunch tone, I'm leaning even more into the mid-range, and I'm not adding low end to make things feel bigger. In fact, I dialed the lows back a little bit. So if I switch between the rhythm and the lead tone, you're seeing the mids knob going up just a little. Now, if we switch over here to the ideal tab, you'll see where some more of this extra mid-range is coming from. The fat switch here gives us a fairly big mid-range boost depending on the amp. Perfect for boosting a crunchy amp into glorious singing lead tone territory. Now, it's a little bit harder to distinguish on this setting because there's also a lot of other stuff happening. So let me switch back over to the crunch tone and I'll show you there. Now here you'll hear the effect a little bit more. Pay close attention to the lower mids. That's where you'll hear it when I kick it in. According to the manual, the fat switch emphasizes mid-range and adds body by shifting the tone stack center frequency, similar to what the fat switch on some Mesa Boogie amps does. Now, other than the fat switch, nothing else in the ideal tab really has changed, other than the stuff we saw in the tone tab. Now, if we look at the preamp tab here, a couple of these controls, the boost level and the saturation drive, are a little bit different from what they are on the crunch tone, but their switches are actually off. Now, those are leftovers from when I was experimenting dialing all this in. Since the switches are off, they're not affecting the sound at all. See, for this lead tone, I already have all the drive I'm looking for, so I'm leaving them off. Now, down here in the power amp tab, I also didn't change a thing. Now, in this tab, the power tubes and CF, I did make some changes. First, I jacked the grid bias way up. This is like biasing your power tubes really hot. Now, I'd never set my power tubes to 85% dissipation in a real amp, but we're digital, so anything goes. Now, if I switch back over to the crunch tone, you'll see here that it's actually biased pretty cold, 47.2%. And when I switch to the lead tone, that jumps way up. So let me show you the difference this makes. We'll look at the rhythm tone. It's 47.2. So I will change this to 47.2. Now I'm going to turn off the delay and the reverb here for a second so you can hear this difference. Now I'll enter 85, but I won't hit enter just yet. I want you to hear the difference. So now there will be a jump in volume, but I want you to pay attention to the tone change as well. Hear how when I set it to 85, the tone just gets bigger and more round? You can hear the mid-range really fill in. This change alone goes a long way towards bringing this tone into lead territory. It's also responsible for most of the volume boost we're getting. Now, I did bring up both the compression and the harmonics controls in the cathode follower section of this tab. The cathode follower, or CF here, is one of the preamp tubes you'll see in many tube amps and is the tube that drives the tone stacks in these amps. Now, this is from the Fractal Audio Wiki. Cathode followers are nonlinear compressors. They distort the signal and the distortion increases as more energy is input. So turning up the CF compression engages the cathode follower emulation. The harmonics control simulates harmonics that occur naturally inside an amp as the tubes interact. Higher values increase the interaction between virtual tubes, yielding softer distortion. Now, I didn't notice a huge tonal difference with these small changes, but it does feel a little, I guess, smoother under my fingers. Okay, once again, on the power supply tab, I'm not changing anything. There are some useful controls here that I'll touch on with some different amps for different vibes down the road, But for now, nothing changes. And likewise, nothing has changed here in the speaker tab. Now, at first glance, the input EQ tab looks very similar to how it does in the ConTONEuum. But when I switch back and forth, you'll notice that this EQ curve is slightly different. Now, I've got 800 hertz boosted on both tones, but for the lead tone, I've widened the Q just a little bit to better fill out that mid-range. Likewise, the output EQ tab looks essentially the same, and it is with one small exception. We'll switch back and forth. You'll notice the EQ type I have switched to the 7-band variable Q EQ. And I did this because the mid-frequency here is 800 hertz as opposed to 500 hertz on the 8-band. A lot of the time you'll see guitarists boosting 1K for their lead sound, and that works too. I tend to like 800 a little better, and it's only boosted 0.8 of a dB, so it's just a tiny little boost. Now, here on the Dynamics tab, we've got some stuff happening. If you'll recall from the ConTONEuum video, I bumped the input dynamics up just a touch to 1. Here on the lead channel, I'm going to take that up a little more to 2.5. This is a dynamics processor controlling the signal as it goes into your amp. Settings below 0 compress the signal. Settings above 0 expand the signal, resulting in a punchier, crunchier, and more dynamic sound. Basically, it's increasing the dynamic range of the guitar signal as it goes into the amp. For the record, this parameter isn't supported on either the FM3 or the AM4. I guess it's one of the things they had to cut in order to squeeze so much great tone into those devices with less CPU overhead. I'm going to cut the delay and reverb off again and show you what a difference the input dynamics make. I'm going to go down to 1 like it is on the ConTONEuum. Get 2.5 entered and we'll see the difference. Now, I don't know if this will come through on the video, but when I bumped it up to 2.5, to me it sounds like the tone just fills out a little bit. Maybe it gets a little more hairy. Now, over here on the output compressor, we also got a little something going on. First, I've selected feedback as the output compression type. Now, this is key because with the feedback comp type, in addition to compressing the output of the amp block, it also applies some dynamics to the input of the amp block. Now, a popular use for this control is to use it to facilitate turning the gain down a bit on the amp, which will allow you to get a cleanish sound when rolling the guitar's volume knob back. But when you play harder and louder, the amp will drive even harder. So as you can see, it's pretty self-explanatory. Now, according to the wiki, the out comp clarity control adjusts the bass response of the compressor and can be used to add clarity to the low end. Now, this is a fairly high gain amp any way you set it, but I can roll back the volume here, and while it's not exactly going to clean up on a lead setting, I can still get that mid-gain kind of sound, great for a more articulate classic rock type lead sound, or even get into more bluesy territory. Another option for the output comp type is the gain enhancer, which, according to the wiki, simulates the acoustic reinforcement of a loud amp coupling into the guitar, enhancing the output signal. This is a fairly popular feature, especially when playing through studio monitors or headphones at not so loud volume levels. Now, I'll admit, I'm usually playing pretty loud here in my control room, so I haven't messed with this option yet, but it's definitely on my list of things to try soon. So, while I have made several adjustments, many things stayed pretty much the same. Same amp, same cab foundation, same general signal flow, no extra layers just for the sake of it. That consistency is what makes these tones feel connected instead of isolated. Okay, so we've covered 2 tones so far. Let's listen to how they work together. I'm going to jump back into my ConTONEuum preset, and I'll switch between the crunch and the rhythm. If you want to explore this yourself, both of the tones that I was working with in this video are available for free on my website, theguitarnerd.com. You can also grab the full ConTONEuum preset there if you want everything, including the tones I haven't got to yet, all in one place. So that's the lead tone. Next up, we'll move to the clean side of this same approach, how to get something clear and dynamic without it feeling thin or sterile. As always, please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.